The wind was cold that evening, blowing through the narrow streets lined with dim lights and the smell of baked bread. A young woman walked slowly, her steps small and tired. Her coat was thin and her shoes were worn at the edges. Every few steps she pulled the coat tighter, as if that could keep out the chill that crept into her bones. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her name was Elena. Once she had a home, a family, and a piano that stood by the window of her small apartment. Music used to fill her mornings. But those days were gone. The war had taken her father, the sickness had taken her mother, and poverty had taken the rest. What was left was only her empty stomach, and a dream that seemed too far to touch. She walked past cafes where the smell of warm soup and roasted meat drifted through the doors. People laughed inside, their faces glowing in the light. She looked at them for a moment, then looked away. It hurt to see happiness when you were hungry. She had spent the last few hours walking with no real direction. Her hands were cold and her stomach twisted with pain. She thought about asking for help, but pride held her back. She had been raised to work for what she needed, not to beg for it. But hunger has a way of breaking even the strongest pride. When she turned a corner, she saw a small cafe at the end of the street. The sign above it was old but charming. The soft sound of a piano came from inside, gentle and beautiful. Her heart beat faster. Music. It had been months since she had touched a piano. Elena stopped in front of the glass window. Inside, she saw people sitting at tables, talking, smiling, eating. A man behind the counter wiped glasses and laughed at something a customer said. In the corner of the cafe stood a piano. Not fancy, just an old upright one, but it looked perfect to her. She stood there for a long time, her eyes fixed on the piano. She could almost feel the keys under her fingers again, the sound of them, the way they spoke to her when words failed. She missed that more than she could explain. Her stomach growled. She pressed her hand against it and closed her eyes. Maybe she could offer something. Maybe they would let her play for a small meal. It sounded foolish even in her head. Who would let a stranger play in their cafe? They'd think she was mad. Still, she had nothing to lose. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The warmth hit her face immediately, and she felt almost dizzy from the sudden comfort. Conversations went on, but a few heads turned toward her. She looked out of place among them, her old coat, her pale face, her nervous eyes. The cafe owner, a man in his 50s with a round face and kind but tired eyes, looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked politely, though a hint of curiosity was in his voice. Elena hesitated. Her throat felt dry. I was wondering," she began softly, "if I could play your piano for a small piece of food, maybe some bread?" The room grew quieter. A few people stopped eating. One woman at a nearby table chuckled under her breath. The owner raised an eyebrow. "Play the piano for food?" he repeated, unsure if he heard correctly. "Yes," Elena said, standing straighter though her voice trembled. "Just one song. I don't ask for money. Only something to eat." There was a pause. Then a man at one of the tables laughed. "Why not?" he said loudly. "Let's hear the musician. Maybe she'll earn her dinner." Laughter spread through the cafe. Some people smiled, some whispered. The owner looked at her again, his expression softening a little. "You can play," he said, pointing toward the piano. "If it's any good, you'll get your meal." "Thank you," Elena whispered. She walked toward the piano, feeling everyone's eyes on her. Her legs shook slightly. She ran her fingers gently over the wooden frame. It was dusty but in good condition. She sat down and took a deep breath. For a moment, she didn't move. She just let her hands rest on the keys. The laughter faded into silence. Then slowly, she began to play. At first, the notes came softly, hesitant, searching. Then her hands found their rhythm and the music began to grow. It was Chopin, the kind of piece that carried both sadness and strength. Each note told a story of hunger, loss, and memories that refused to die. The sound filled the cafe, warm and deep like a voice that had waited too long to speak. The people who had been laughing fell quiet. The clinking of cutlery stopped. Even the owner, who had started wiping glasses again, froze mid-motion. They watched her fingers move, fast, sure, graceful, as if the piano itself was alive. Elena closed her eyes and lost herself in the music. She wasn't in that cafe anymore. She wasn't hungry or cold. She was back in her mother's living room, playing while sunlight streamed through the curtains. Her mother's soft humming filled the background. For a few precious moments, the world was right again. When the last note faded into silence, no one spoke. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly someone began to clap. Another joined, then the whole room filled with applause. Elena opened her eyes, startled. She stood up quickly, unsure what to do. The owner came forward, wiping his hands on his apron. His eyes looked different now, full of surprise and respect. "That was extraordinary," he said quietly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Elena smiled faintly. "A long time ago," she said. "Before life became different." The owner nodded, still in awe. "Wait here." He walked behind the counter and returned with a plate full of food, bread, soup, and a small piece of meat. "Here, eat, please." Her hands shook as she took the plate. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't thank me," he said. "You earned it." She sat at a corner table and began to eat slowly. Every bite tasted like a gift. The other guests kept glancing at her, their expressions softer now. The same people who had laughed were now quiet, thoughtful. An older woman approached her. "That was beautiful," she said gently. "You have a gift, my dear. Don't give up on it." Elena looked up, smiling weakly. "Thank you. I won't." When she finished her meal, she sat for a while longer, just listening to the low hum of voices and the soft clatter of plates. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around her like a blanket. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. She could have left right then, but something inside told her to play one more song. She walked back to the piano. No one stopped her. When she began to play again, the room quieted instantly. This time it wasn't Chopin. It was her own melody. Something she had written years ago when life was still kind. It was simple, gentle, full of hope. The owner leaned against the counter, listening. The laughter that had filled the cafe earlier was replaced by something else. Peace. When she finished, she stood and whispered, "Thank you for letting me play." The owner smiled. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "You can play again if you like. I'll make sure there's food for you." Elena looked at him, surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "Really. You bring something special here." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Then I will," she said softly. She walked out of the cafe that night with a full stomach and a heart that felt lighter than it had in months. The cold air still bit at her skin, but it didn't hurt as much. Somewhere inside her, hope had woken up again. The street was quiet except for the sound of her footsteps. The moon hung low and the stars shimmered faintly. She looked up at them and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't just for the food. It was for being seen, for being heard. Behind her, the cafe lights glowed through the window, and the faint sound of the piano still lingered in the air, the last notes of a night no one inside would forget. For the first time in a long time, Elena smiled. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight she had music, warmth, and the promise of a meal. And that was enough. She walked on, her steps steady now. The world was still hard, but she had found something she thought she had lost, her courage. And as long as she could play, she knew she would survive. The next morning came with a soft drizzle. The streets glistened with rain, and people hurried by holding umbrellas or newspapers above their heads. Elena woke up under the small awning of an old bookstore, where she had found shelter for the night. Her coat was damp, but she didn't mind. She was still thinking about the cafe, the piano, and the sound of applause that had warmed her heart more than the food itself. Her stomach grumbled again, reminding her that one meal couldn't last forever. But she smiled anyway. The cafe owner had told her to come back. Maybe he really meant it. Maybe she could play again today. The thought made her stand up, brush off her coat, and start walking. The cafe looked different in the daylight, smaller, quieter, but still welcoming. She hesitated outside for a moment, afraid that maybe they had forgotten her already. She didn't want to walk in and see the laughter again. But then she remembered how the owner had looked at her when she finished playing. There had been no mockery in his eyes, only kindness. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. The warm smell of coffee greeted her again. A few morning customers were sitting by the windows reading newspapers. The owner noticed her right away and smiled. "You came back," he said. "I did," she answered softly. "You said I could play again." "And you can," he said, nodding toward the piano. "But first breakfast. You can't play on an empty stomach. Her eyes widened slightly. You don't have to. I insist, he said with a smile. Sit down. She sat at a small table near the counter. A few people watched curiously, whispering to each other, but she ignored them. Soon, a plate of warm bread and eggs appeared in front of her, along with a cup of tea. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through her. When she finished, she thanked the owner quietly and went to the piano. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. This time it was excitement. She sat down and pressed the first key, letting the sound ring out. The cafe was still, as if waiting for her to begin. She started with a soft melody, something simple and cheerful. It was the kind of music that made people smile without realizing it. The notes danced lightly, filling the air like sunlight after rain. The customers began to listen, their conversations fading. Even those passing by outside slowed down to peek through the window. The owner leaned on the counter, a small smile playing on his lips. There was something healing about her music. It wasn't perfect, some notes were slightly off, but it was honest. It came from her heart, and that was what made it beautiful. When she finished, the small crowd clapped softly. Elena smiled, shy but happy. Thank you, she said, her cheeks pink with warmth. An older man at a nearby table called out, Play another. She hesitated, then nodded. This time she chose something a little deeper, a melody she had written herself, one that told her story without words. The room fell completely silent. Her music spoke of the cold streets, the hunger, the loneliness, and yet somehow it carried hope. Hope that life could still change. When the song ended, even the sound of rain outside seemed to pause. The applause that followed was stronger this time, genuine and full of feeling. The owner walked over and said quietly, You have a gift. People can feel your story when you play. Elena looked down, embarrassed. It's all I have left. That's more than enough, he replied. You gave everyone here something beautiful. From that day on, Elena became part of the cafe in a quiet way. She would come in each morning, help the owner wipe tables or sweep the floor in exchange for breakfast, and then play for the customers. People started calling her the girl who plays for food, but they said it with affection, not mockery. Every day, new faces came to listen. Some left coins on the piano. Others brought flowers or small gifts. Elena never asked for anything, but kindness began to find her. Music, it seemed, was not only feeding her stomach, but also her soul. One afternoon, a woman entered the cafe carrying a leather bag and a notebook. She sat near the piano, listening quietly. When Elena finished playing, the woman approached her. That was beautiful, she said. You play with real feeling. Have you ever performed professionally? Elena shook her head. I used to study music before life changed, the woman smiled. I'm a music teacher at the local academy. We could use someone to help with lessons. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work, and it comes with food. Elena stared at her, unsure if she had heard right. You mean, you'd hire me? The woman nodded. If you're willing. The cafe owner, who had overheard the conversation, beamed. You should take it, he said. It's time your music reached more ears. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She had been lost for so long that she had stopped believing in chances like this. Thank you, she whispered. The woman smiled. Come by tomorrow morning. We'll start then. That night, when Elena left the cafe, the streets didn't feel as cold as before. The rain had stopped and the air was fresh. She walked slowly, her mind full of new hope. She still had no home, no money, but she had a direction now, and that was something she hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, she went to the academy. The woman greeted her warmly and introduced her to a group of children. Their laughter filled the room as they tried to imitate her on the small keyboards. Elena felt something inside her lift, something she thought was gone forever. Teaching them brought her joy, and seeing their smiles reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. At the end of the day, she returned to the cafe. The owner handed her a small envelope. Your first pay, he said. From both of us. Elena stared at it, tears filling her eyes again. You didn't have to, he shrugged. You earned it. Everyone in this cafe feels lighter when you play. That's worth something? She smiled through her tears. I don't know how to thank you. Just keep playing, he said gently. That's enough thanks for all of us. That night she bought herself a small loaf of bread and shared it with a stray cat she met by the river. As she sat there watching the moonlight dance on the water, she thought about how much had changed in just a few days. One act of courage, one simple question, "May I play for a piece of food?" had opened a door she never expected. The world was still hard. She still had to find a place to sleep each night. But now she had music, work, and people who believed in her. And that made all the difference. In the weeks that followed, the cafe became known not just for its food, but for its music. People came from other parts of town to hear her play. The owner fixed up the piano, polishing it until it shone. Sometimes children from the academy would visit and play beside her, filling the cafe with laughter and sound. Elena never forgot where she started. Each time she sat at the piano, she remembered that cold night when she walked in hungry and afraid. She remembered the laughter that turned into applause. And she remembered how kindness, once given, could grow into something far greater. Her story wasn't finished. It was only beginning. But for now, she was grateful. She had food, warmth, and a reason to keep playing. And in every note she played, there was a quiet promise to never give up no matter how hard life became. Weeks turned into months, and the cafe continued to fill with life and warmth. Every morning, people gathered to hear Elena play. Her music had become the soul of the small cafe. The sound of the piano drifted into the street, drawing in strangers who came for a coffee and stayed for her songs. The cafe owner often stood behind the counter, pretending to clean glasses, but really, he was listening, smiling quietly as her melodies carried through the room. Elena's life had slowly begun to take shape again. She still lived simply, grateful for what she had. The small room above the cafe had become her home. It wasn't much, a single bed, a lamp, and a window that looked out over the street. But to her, it felt like everything she had ever needed. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit by that window, watching the city lights flicker and fade. The sounds of the world outside comforted her. They reminded her that life was still moving forward. Each day followed a rhythm, morning at the cafe, afternoon at the music academy, and evenings filled with quiet practice. She had started teaching children again, just a few at first. Her students adored her. She was gentle and patient, never raising her voice or showing disappointment. When they made mistakes, she would simply smile and say, "Let's try again. Slowly this time." The children loved how she made learning feel like play, and they began to call her Miss Melody. It started as a joke among them, but soon everyone used it, even the parents. She laughed whenever she heard it, though secretly it touched her deeply. One sunny afternoon, as she was guiding a small boy through a simple song, the director of the music academy walked into the classroom. He stood quietly at the back, listening as she encouraged the children. When the lesson ended and the children left, he approached her with a thoughtful look. "You have a gift," he said, "not just for music, but for teaching. The children love you and your playing is extraordinary. We're holding our annual recital next month. Would you perform?" Elena froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Me, perform?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes, the recital isn't just for students. It's a celebration of music. I think the audience would be moved by your story, and by your heart." Her hands trembled slightly. It had been years since she had stood on a real stage. The idea both excited and frightened her. "I'll think about it," she whispered. That evening, she told the cafe owner about the invitation. He listened quietly, leaning on the counter, then said, "You should do it. People need to hear you." "I'm afraid," she admitted. "What if I fail?" he smiled. "You've already played for strangers who laughed at you once. You turned their laughter into applause. You can do it again." She looked down, smiling faintly. "Maybe you're right." In the following weeks, she practiced more than ever. Each night after the cafe closed, she sat at the piano and played under the dim light. Her fingers moved with confidence, but her eyes often filled with tears. The music she played wasn't just notes, it was her story, her memories, her gratitude. The cafe owner would sometimes listen from the stairs, smiling quietly to himself. The melodies she played seemed to fill the air with hope. The night of the recital came quickly. The small concert hall was warm and elegant, filled with the soft murmur of voices and the faint scent of flowers. Elena stood backstage, her hands cold, her heart racing. She could hear the sounds of the audience finding their seats. Some of her students were sitting in the front row, waving at her and whispering words of encouragement. Their excitement made her smile. When it was finally her turn, she walked slowly onto the stage. The lights felt bright against her skin, and for a moment she couldn't move. Then she saw the piano, polished and waiting, and everything else disappeared. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers fall gently onto the keys. The first few notes were shaky, but soon her hands found their rhythm. She closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. The melody was soft at first, filled with longing, then grew bolder, stronger, brighter. She wasn't just playing a song. She was telling her story of hunger, hope, and second chances. Every note carried a piece of her heart. When the final note faded, there was silence. For a brief moment, she thought perhaps they hadn't liked it. Then the applause began, soft at first, then louder, rising like a wave. People stood clapping and cheering. Some had tears in their eyes. Elena stood and bowed, her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't realized had fallen. It was the first time in years she felt completely seen. Not as a beggar or a stranger, but as an artist. After the concert, the director approached her again, smiling warmly. "You were wonderful," he said. A man from the city's cultural center was in the audience. "He wants to meet you." Elena's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," he said. Your music reminded him of something he hadn't felt in a long time. The man was kind and soft-spoken. He handed her a small card and said, "We're organizing a charity concert next month to raise funds for children in need. Would you perform?" Her first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't used to attention or large events. But then she thought of her students, the cafe, and all the people who had helped her find her way again. Maybe this was her chance to give something back. "I'd be honored," she said. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The story of the pianist who once played for food began to spread quietly across the city. Newspapers wrote small articles about her. Some people recognized her on the street, smiling and saying, "I saw you perform," or "Your story inspired me." It felt strange to be noticed, but Elena never let it go to her head. Each morning she was still at the cafe, playing for anyone who would listen. The cafe owner noticed more customers coming every day. Some brought flowers for Elena. Others came just to hear her play in person. The little cafe, once quiet and overlooked, had become a place of warmth and music. It was no longer just a place to eat. It was a place to feel. When the night of the charity concert arrived, the hall was much larger than the one she had played in before. There were rows and rows of seats, cameras, lights, and reporters. The audience was filled with people from all walks of life. Wealthy donors, families, children from the music academy, and of course the cafe owner. Sitting quietly in the back row, Elena stood backstage, her hands trembling once more. The noise of the crowd felt overwhelming. But then she took a deep breath and remembered the night everything had begun. The night she had asked to play for a piece of food. That memory gave her strength. She walked onto the stage to the sound of polite applause, sat down at the piano and closed her eyes. This time she didn't play someone else's music. She played her own. A melody she had written late at night in the quiet of the cafe. It was a song about pain, about hope, and about finding light again after darkness. The audience sat completely still. Her music filled the room like a whisper of truth, gentle, honest, powerful. When the final chord faded, silence lingered. Then the applause began, louder and louder, echoing off the walls. People stood again, cheering. Some wiped tears from their faces. Elena bowed deeply, her heart full. For the first time, she felt that all the pain she had endured had led her exactly where she was meant to be. After the concert, people crowded around her. They wanted to meet her, to thank her, to tell her how much her music had meant to them. It was overwhelming. Among the crowd, she spotted the cafe owner. He didn't rush to her. He simply stood there, smiling proudly. When she reached him, he said quietly, "You did it." She laughed softly, eyes wet. "No," she said. "We did it." That night, after all the noise and celebration, she returned to the cafe. The streets were quiet. Rain had started to fall, just as it had on the night she first arrived there. Through the window, she saw the piano waiting for her. She smiled and went inside. The cafe was empty, warm, and peaceful. She sat down and began to play, softly, slowly. The melody was simple, almost like a lullaby. The cafe owner stood behind the counter, listening as he always did. When she finished, he brought her a cup of tea and said, "You've come a long way." She smiled. "Because someone gave me a chance." He shook his head. "Because you asked for one." They both laughed quietly. Outside, the rain kept falling, but it no longer felt sad. It sounded gentle, like a rhythm that matched her music. Elena looked out the window and whispered, "I used to be afraid of the rain. It reminded me of what I'd lost. but now it reminds me of how everything started. He nodded slowly. Sometimes the hardest beginnings lead to the brightest songs. She smiled, rested her fingers on the keys again, and said softly, "Then let's play one more." The music floated out into the night, soft, tender, filled with peace. The rain fell, the city slept, and in that little cafe hope played on. After the charity concert, Elena's life began to change in quiet but meaningful ways. Her name appeared in a few local newspapers, and more people started visiting the cafe, curious to meet the pianist who had once played for food. Yet she didn't let it get to her head. Fame, she thought, was as fragile as sound. It could fill a room and vanish in seconds. What mattered was the feeling it left behind. She continued her routine with the same humility as before. Mornings at the cafe, afternoons teaching at the music academy, and nights spent practicing alone in the dim light of her room. The piano keys were worn from her touch, but she loved them all the same. Each note she played carried a piece of her gratitude for the cafe owner, for the children she taught, and for the music that had saved her. One crisp morning, as she finished her first song of the day, a man in a dark suit entered the cafe. He watched her play for a moment, then approached her gently. "Good morning," he said kindly. "I work with the city's cultural department. We're planning an international music exchange program. We've heard your story and we'd love for you to represent our city." Elena blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "Me? Represent the city?" He smiled. "Yes. You have something special, something real. We believe your story could inspire others, especially young musicians from difficult backgrounds." She looked down at her hands, feeling both honored and afraid. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that." "You'll never know unless you try," the man said, handing her a card. "Think about it. We'd be honored to have you." That evening, she told the cafe owner about the offer. He listened quietly, nodding. "You've come far," he said. "Maybe it's time to see what's beyond these walls." "I'm afraid," she admitted softly. "What if I don't belong there?" He smiled gently. "You belong wherever your music takes you." For days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of traveling to another country, playing for strangers, and carrying her story beyond the city. It felt impossible. But deep inside, she knew she had to take the chance. She had learned long ago that courage often came disguised as fear. Weeks later, she found herself boarding a small plane with other musicians. Most of them were younger, full of confidence and laughter. Elena sat quietly by the window, watching the clouds drift by. She didn't bring much, just a small suitcase, her music sheets, and a pendant she always wore around her neck, a gift from her late mother. It was her lucky charm. When they arrived, the city felt different, bigger, louder, faster. The concert hall where they would perform was grand, with shining floors and tall glass windows. Everything seemed overwhelming. But when Elena saw the piano on stage, she felt a calmness wash over her. It didn't matter where she was. The piano was always home. During the rehearsal, other musicians played first, violinists, cellists, singers. Their performances were flawless. When it was her turn, she sat down and closed her eyes. The first note trembled slightly, but soon her fingers moved with grace. The melody flowed gently, filling the hall with warmth. When she finished, the room was silent. Then one by one, people began to clap. The event organizers approached her afterward. "Your playing has so much emotion," one of them said. "It's like you're telling a story without words." Elena smiled shyly. "Maybe because it's the only story I know how to tell." On the night of the main concert, the hall was packed. People from different countries sat side by side, waiting to hear music that crossed all barriers. When it was her turn, Elena took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights felt bright, but she wasn't nervous this time. She remembered everything that had brought her here. The laughter of strangers, the kindness of the cafe owner, the faces of the children she taught. All of it had led to this moment. She began to play, a new piece she had written just for the occasion. The melody was soft and hopeful, rising like morning light. It spoke of hunger, kindness, and second chances. It was a song for anyone who had ever felt invisible. As she played, she could feel the audience holding its breath. When the final note faded, there was silence, then thunderous applause. People stood cheering and clapping. Some even shouted her name. After the performance, journalists approached her with questions and photographers asked for pictures. But Elena stayed humble. "I'm just grateful to share my music," she said softly. "It's not about me, it's about what music can do." When she returned home, the cafe was decorated with flowers. The cafe owner greeted her at the door, smiling widely. "Our traveler returns," he said with pride. "I hope you didn't forget us while you were out conquering the world." She laughed. "I could never forget this place." From then on, the cafe became more than a local stop. It became a destination. People from nearby towns came to see the pianist who had traveled the world, but still played in the same cozy corner every morning. Elena continued her routines, but something inside her had changed. She had seen how far music could reach, how it could connect strangers and heal hearts. One evening, as she was closing the cafe with the owner, a small girl stood outside the window. She looked cold and uncertain, her clothes worn and her hands tucked into her sleeves. Elena recognized that look. It was the same one she had once worn. She walked to the door, opened it, and said gently, "Are you all right?" The girl looked up timidly. "I was listening," she said. "You play so pretty. I wish I could play too, but I don't have a piano." Elena's heart ached. She smiled and said, "Come inside." She guided the girl to the piano and said, "Sit here. Try pressing one key. See what it feels like." The girl hesitated, then pressed a note. It rang out softly through the quiet cafe. Her eyes widened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elena nodded. "Every sound can be beautiful, even the smallest one. Would you like to learn?" The girl nodded eagerly. And so on that night, a new chapter began. Not for Elena alone, but for someone else who needed a chance. She started teaching the girl every evening after closing time. They sat side by side at the piano, their laughter filling the cafe. The owner often pretended to be busy, but secretly watched them, smiling to himself. History, it seemed, was repeating in the best possible way. Word spread about the lessons, and soon more children from poor families began to visit. Some came shyly, some boldly, but all were welcomed. Elena refused to charge them. "Music gave me my life back," she said. "Now I want to give it to others." Years passed, and the cafe became a small community center. The piano was no longer just an instrument, it was a bridge between lives. The girl she had first taught grew into a talented young musician, often performing alongside her teacher. Elena's hair began to turn silver, but her hands never lost their grace. Every note she played still carried the same warmth, the same story of courage and kindness. Sometimes, when she played at night, she would think of the past, the cold streets, the hunger, the laughter of those who once doubted her. She no longer felt pain when she remembered it. Instead, she felt gratitude. Those moments had shaped her, led her here, and taught her that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. One quiet evening, as the cafe lights glowed softly, Elena sat at the piano playing her favorite melody. The cafe owner, older now but still smiling, sat nearby with a cup of tea. When she finished, he said softly, "Do you ever think about that night? The first time you came in here?" She smiled, eyes distant. "Every time I play," she said. "That night was the start of everything." He nodded. "You asked to play for a piece of food. I gave you bread, but you gave me something far greater." Elena laughed gently. We both gave each other a chance. Outside, the streets were quiet. The same rain that once fell on a hungry girl now tapped gently on the cafe windows. Inside, the warmth of the piano filled the air. The cafe had seen laughter, tears, and dreams, but most of all, it had seen hope. Elena played one last song before closing. It was soft, full of peace. The sound drifted out into the night, carrying her story once more through the city. Somewhere, someone passing by stopped to listen, smiling without knowing why. The music spoke for her, just as it always had, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, can echo forever. Years had passed since that cold evening when Elena first asked, "May I play for a piece of food?" The cafe where her journey began had changed over time, but it still carried the same warmth. The walls had been repainted, the tables replaced, yet the piano in the corner remained the same. Its wooden frame was scratched in places, but its keys still shone softly, polished by careful hands every morning. People from all over the city now came to the cafe not just for coffee or meals, but to feel something real. They came for the music. Some came because they had heard her story, while others simply wanted to sit in that quiet corner where kindness and music had once met. The cafe had become more than a place to eat. It had become a small home for anyone who needed hope. Elena had grown older. Her hair was silver now, soft and thin, but her eyes were still bright. Her hands, though slower, carried the same grace they always had. Each note she played was softer than before, but it carried more emotion, more memory. The music that once came from hunger now came from peace. She no longer played to survive. She played to give thanks. Many of her old students had grown up. Some had gone on to study music abroad. Others became teachers or performers themselves. Every few months, one of them would return to the cafe, bringing flowers or small gifts. They would sit beside her at the piano, and together they would play the old songs. Sometimes they would laugh at missed notes. Sometimes they would cry quietly at the memories that surfaced. One morning, a letter arrived at the cafe, addressed to her. The envelope was thick and cream-colored with careful handwriting. She opened it slowly, not used to receiving mail. Inside was a letter that read, "Dear Elena, we are building a new music center for children who cannot afford lessons. Your story has inspired us, and we would like to name it after you, the Elena Music House. Your kindness and talent have given hope to many. We would be honored if you would come and open it yourself." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She sat quietly for a long moment, holding the letter against her chest. She had never imagined something like this. All she ever wanted was to play, to share her love for music. Now her name would live on in a place meant to give others the same chance she once prayed for. That evening, she went to the cafe earlier than usual. The air smelled faintly of rain, and a soft wind moved through the streets. She walked slowly, enjoying the familiar creak of the wooden floor when she entered. The cafe owner was behind the counter polishing cups. He looked up with a smile. "You're early today," he said. "I wanted to play before the rush," she answered. She sat at the piano and began to play a gentle tune. The sound was soft, like a memory. As her fingers moved across the keys, she thought about everything. The cold nights she had endured, the laughter of the people who once mocked her, the kindness of the man who gave her food that first night. Every note carried a part of her story. By the time the cafe began to fill, her music had already wrapped the room in calm. People listened quietly, as they always did when she played. When she finished, there was a silence, then soft applause. A young man, one of her former students, approached her with a small envelope. "Teacher," he said, smiling, "this is from all of us." She opened it carefully. Inside was a note and a small key tied with a red ribbon. "For the new music house," the note said. "We built it with your spirit, but it needs your hands to open it for the first time." Tears filled her eyes again. She couldn't speak. She simply smiled and took the young man's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. The cafe owner watched from the counter, his eyes glistening. "Looks like your song still isn't over," he said quietly. A few days later, she traveled with a small group of her students to the new town. The journey was long, but her heart felt light. When the bus arrived, she stepped out and saw the building for the first time. It was small but beautiful, painted in warm colors with large windows. Children stood outside holding flowers. Above the door was a sign that read, "Elena Music House, a place for every dream." She smiled as tears rolled down her cheeks. The mayor handed her the key and said, "Would you do the honor?" She nodded and turned the key in the lock. The door opened, revealing a bright room filled with instruments. Pianos, violins, guitars, flutes, all donated by people who believed in her story. On the wall hung pictures of her younger days. Her first concert, the cafe, the smiling faces of the children she had taught over the years. It was like walking through a living memory. A little girl tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Elena," she said shyly, "will you play something for us?" Elena smiled warmly. "Of course." She sat at one of the new pianos and began to play the same melody she had played that first night so long ago, the one that had earned her bread and kindness. The notes were softer now, slower, but each one carried love. The children gathered around her, listening with wide eyes. When she finished, they clapped and laughed, their joy echoing in the hall. From that day forward, the music house became a second home for many. Children came from nearby towns to learn. Some could barely afford shoes, but they were welcomed without question. Elena made sure of it. "Music is for everyone," she would say. "The heart doesn't need money to feel."